Hi, and welcome to the podcast Making Sense, brought to you by Navy Federal Credit Union. I'm your host, Emily Bigham, and each week I'll be taking your questions to the experts to help you make sense of your money. Pun intended. Welcome back. Today on the podcast is Matt Bean, here to talk about best careers for military spouses. Matt is a colleague of mine here at Navy Federal. He leads the commercial banking team in our Business Solutions division and is a military spouse himself. Welcome, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
So what is the best careers for military spouses list?
Yeah, definitely. So it is a wonderful list for military spouses like myself who are seeking employment, whether they have just PCS'ed or moved, looking for career transition, or simply just doing something different.
So why did you choose to come up with this list? What was the momentum or motivation behind preparing this, publishing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think of military spouse, and when you think of unemployment right now, we all see that the unemployment rate's fairly low nationally. We take a look at it; it's at 5-6%. However, the unemployment rate for a military spouse like myself is still very staggering, north of 30%. And the unemployed is still roughly around the same. And so when you see a military spouse, and when you look at the unemployment rate with them compared to the national unemployment rate, it's much different. And so this is a great opportunity for a military spouse to segue, like I said, into segue into a new career, start something different, whether they lost their job due to move, etc.
So what's on the list?
Definitely. So we have, as a credit union, we've identified major industries segments that work well for a military spouse. So when you think of it, government and public administration, business support and human resources, healthcare, social assistance, educational services, financial services, retail customer service, manufacturing, and defense contracting. We've notated that these types of industries fit very, very well for a military spouse. Granted, they're very large. However, coupled with your family orientation, moving, what's going on in today's world, these fit best for a military spouse.
They are broad, as you said, and looking at the list, there seem to be certain roles within these industries that would be best for the military spouses. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that you decided to pick out these certain roles?
Absolutely. So look at the first one. So take a look at government and public administration. So military families, they relocate. And where are they working? They're working out of Army bases, naval bases, Air Force stations, etc. And what's tied to those bases? Federal buildings, state buildings. And so that's when you kind of see government and public administration, that there are a lot of job opportunities tied to military locations. So that's when you take a look at San Diego, you look at Washington, D.C., areas in North Carolina. You also look at places in Texas and so on. If you look at the second one, so like take a look at financial services. Financial services is such a broad industry. However, those types of skills and that type of industry is very, very transferable. And so when you look at a military spouse moving and whatnot, it's so easy to parlay your skills and experience into a financial services job, whether it's banking, it could be mortgage, etc.
Were there any surprises to you?
To be honest, not really. Because like what you said before, it's very, very broad. So it's starting from like this top funnel approach and then really narrowing it down as to what that person or persons wants to be doing. I mean, when you take a look at government and public administration, that's like a 30,000-foot overview. But then you want to get more concrete and be like, okay, what is it exactly what I want to do within federal government? Or it could be in state.
So I noticed that a lot of these roles are analyst or project manager, or they seem to be roles that you could take on the road, or they have a lot of flexibility, they're remote. And I also saw a point in here about how military spouses, even pre-pandemic, had a pretty low, actually a pretty high unemployment rate. But what was confusing to me was the part about the pre-pandemic and then it getting more difficult during the pandemic, when we're hearing that a lot of companies are sending people home to work from home. There's a lot more remote work available. Why is it more difficult during the pandemic, and do you see that changing?
So it's interesting. The best thing for a military spouse right now, and I don't want this to sound negative, is COVID. That COVID has really opened up this notion of you don't need to be in the office. And so the whole misconception of a military spouse is, pre-pandemic is you go in for a job interview and you tell that person or the hiring manager, I'm a military spouse. They immediately think, oh, you're only going to be here for a year or two and then you have to move. And that's not the case. And so what COVID did, not only with Navy Federal Credit Union, but any other organization, has been like, no, we can do the same amount of work from home, be more efficient, and be more effective. And so that's the best thing that's ever happened for military spouses, unfortunately, for these past 2 or 3 years.
Right. No, but that is great. And that's a good point that you bring up. I also saw here that military spouses, 89% of them have a college education, 30% have a 4-year degree, and 15% have an advanced degree. So these spouses are people who have been in the workforce. They know what's up. They understand competitive salaries. I'm surprised that it's difficult for them, but I'm happy that it is probably getting better and that this list can help them.
It is, and it's interesting, depending on where we are in our generations, we're dual income households today. You don't see a lot of single income households today. We just can't do it with the way economy is growing and whatnot. And so this whole idea of the military spouse stays home and the spouse is out and active duty service members at work is kind of like null anymore. It's gone. Joking aside, it's so funny. They always, my wife gets asked all the time what I do at home. Is your husband a stay-at-home stay-at-home husband, stay-at-home father, et cetera. So it's a lot different. One thing that people do run into, that I've run into here in DC, is licensing issues. And that's what you just kind of noted, is 4-year degrees, professional degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, medical doctors, et cetera. There's a lot of military spouses that have those degrees and above. And so one thing that they kind of do run into is this licensing thing of transferring their licenses from one state to another. And so that is one hurdle that some of them are facing right now.
I can see that would be difficult. And also it's very unmotivating to start a job and really be excited about it. And then all of a sudden you have to pick up and move and it's not up to you. And not only do you have to move yourself, but your family, your kids, your homes. And it's a lot of work. I come from a military family. My dad was in the Navy. My mom was the military spouse who stayed home. They always said that it's the toughest job in the Navy is the military spouse. And I believe it, the spouse deploys and the stay-at-home spouse is watching the kids, and she left a career for that path. And thankfully, we're fine here today. But to your point, I don't see how families could do that now, not having a dual income. It just seems very, very difficult. So I'm glad that there are these resources.
Yeah, think about just, it's interesting when you go back to the skills transferring from one state to another. Think of a lot of folks who are licensed case social workers or therapists that you could be registered to practice in the state of Texas, but then you move to Virginia. You have to start that process all over again. You could be a medical doctor, and then you have to transfer that as well. And so it can be tough and cumbersome for people to be having to do this every couple of years, every 4 years. However, there's been leaps and bounds over the past 4, 5, 6 years to help military spouses do this, have the resources available to accelerate the process, even at a reduced cost.
Great. That's wonderful.
Yep.
What would you say is the biggest obstacle?
The biggest obstacle is not having your experience and skills transferable.
Why?
That's number one, because you have to be able to adapt. That's the key thing. Obviously, military spouses, I pride myself and all military spouses to be adaptable because you're moving from one state to another. You're resilient and you're tenacious. On the flip side, it's like having those skills and experience to be transferable from one state to another. Take Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a mecca for job opportunities. However, you move in 3-4 years and you can go to Dayton, Ohio, or Colorado Springs, or L.A., or San Diego. But then you want to ensure that your experience and skills and attributes that you've had in Washington, D.C. are then transferable to companies alike in those other surrounding states.
So tell me a little bit more about your experience as a military spouse. Did you run into some of these challenges?
It was interesting. My wife and I got married in 2014. We moved across country in 2014, bought a new house in 2014. So we experienced all of life's challenges really within this 6-7 week period. I was with a company in Denver at the time, and I had a huge challenge. I remember I had approached my manager and letting her know that I'm moving to D.C. And it was really interesting to see her reaction. She took it as almost like an insult. And I let her know, I'm like, hey, I'm not moving because I want to. I'm moving because we have to. And so it was an interesting process to finally get that going with that company. And I was able to finally get a transfer. However, it took a long time. It was not an easy process. There were job opportunities out here in DC that I could have applied for, and I did. It took about a 3 to 4 or 5 month period where they finally offered me a new position out here in DC.
With your previous company?
With my previous employer. However, what I wanted to do was I'm like, if this is going to be so hard, then I don't know if I want to work for a company like that. And so what I did is I went to LinkedIn, started networking, started meeting people. And that was the cool thing was I knew DC is a very transferable city. And so people are willing to help people out. And I was mind blown. I remember I had emailed 10 people through LinkedIn, and I remember I used to get 8 or 9 responses right away saying, hey, I want to help. Because I have to remember a lot of people who live here in DC reached out to somebody years ago to help them get a job. And so it's just like that spider effect.
Right. Were you able to use any sort of network, military spouse network? Does that exist? I'm assuming it exists.
It does. Back then, I didn't know. And so it's grown leaps and bounds over the past 5 to 8 years of what that network is like. I will tell you the military spouse network today, it's a very tight community, and military spouses look out for military spouses.
That's great. That's nice to know. I also read here that some of the things that they're looking for besides flexibility and is a meaningful job. And that has to be important to them. I mean, they're in the or they're connected to the military, which also has meaning. Did that play a part in this list, do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'll just give you a personal example real quick is my job with Navy Federal. I was not looking for a job. However, this opportunity came to me, and I never even thought about ever working for a credit union. But we're a military family, and what better way to help than work for Navy Federal? And it's wonderful, and it's been able to help me make a significant impact and contribution not only to the members that we serve, but to my team and to myself and to my family.
That's great. We heard that a lot at Navy Federal, just from employee surveys about the meaning of work, and I know it means a lot to me to be able to help the military, coming from a military family and household.
We're all connected somehow, like, the military. Like, we think about, like, I've never served. However, if we've been in this country for 2+ generations, we've had a family member who has served at one time. And so there is some sort of connection. But what I love is everybody has such a high appreciation and strong appreciation for the military. So this is the first year we've done a list for military spouses. However, if we go to 2018, we developed the first iteration of Best Cities After Service for Veterans. In 2019, we developed Best Careers After Service. And then last year, in 2020, we published Best Cities After Service 2.0, which helps identify top cities in the U.S. for military members who recently completed active duty service and families changing priorities due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, I do want to let everybody know that if you're interested in more resources, check out our blog. Our blog's awesome. It gives great articles, tips, and topics for myself, like a military spouse, or for veterans or anybody else at www.navyfederal.org/blog.
So in talking about tips for job seekers, we've talked about the different industries that are great for military spouses, but what are your tips? You talked about you went on LinkedIn, you were networking. What are some other ways?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to social media. And I know there's a lot of folks who are kind of weary about social media. One thing is through LinkedIn, that's how you get jobs today. And this is what I tell everybody. And I don't ever say this like a bragging thing or whatnot, but I really have prided myself on my network. And every job that I've ever had has been through my network. I've never gone to a careers website to apply. And that's so important for people to be building that brand. I've always said, when you go to that career page on a website, it's almost applying to a black hole almost, because you and hundreds of other applications are being submitted, and you're just kind of keeping your fingers crossed and praying that, hey, a recruiter picks up your resume at that time or day. And so there's so many other targeted ways. And so LinkedIn is definitely the professional network. I've always said that's my professional resume. That's how you build your network. That's how you meet people. And so it's so important for anybody, a military spouse or anybody else who's looking for that career transition. That's my number one tip. There's some great courses out there on how to utilize it, how to be more effective on it. It's not necessarily spending hours a day on there. It's just a targeted approach, having a strategy in mind, and executing that.
I think that sounds wonderful for someone who has a career and has a resume built up. What if you are just entering the workforce, but you're also a military spouse who's PCSing?
Absolutely. So Navy Federal's partnered with Hire Heroes USA, which is a great organization that you can benefit from. So hireheroesusa.org. They have great starting tips and tricks for somebody like you were just talking about to do that, where maybe LinkedIn could be step number 3 or 4. But yeah, there's a lot of people who face that challenge, and it can be intimidating, it can be hard, and trust me, it's not easy. Absolutely, it's not.
I can understand too if you're looking for the flex. I mean, there's so many things that really need to make it work for military spouses, but there are jobs out there, and this list must be really helpful. And I'm really excited that you guys did this, because I think that it's just another resource and a way for people to start and see, oh, my skills are transferable. Like, just because I didn't work in healthcare before doesn't mean that I can't transfer my skills over to healthcare or a larger organization. So I think this list is wonderful. And you mentioned, I guess you and I were talking about it earlier, about how this is a primary focus for the First Lady and her Joining Forces initiative or task force.
Yeah, I remember when I first moved to D.C. when President Biden back then was Vice President Biden. Jill Biden's big initiative was military spouse employment. And this was when in 2014, 15, and 16. And so it's great to see with her being the First Lady now that it's still a number. I'm not going to say number 1, but it's definitely a top 2 or 3 initiative from her is military spouse employment. She has a very strong connection with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, with Hire Our Heroes, Hiring Our Heroes, et cetera.
So where is some of these resources that listeners can go
Absolutely.
to?
So I encourage everybody to go to NavyFederal.org / military spouse, and they can seek that list there. Also, you can go to Hire Heroes USA as well as 2 wonderful starting points.
Great. Well, is there anything else that we missed that you want to mention here about military spouses, best careers? No,
I think, what I would tell anybody who's a mil spouse today is don't ever be intimidated for trying to do a job in a different industry like you brought up. Navy Federal Credit Union, or most banking in general. I'll use banking as an example because that's my career. We don't necessarily like to see that you have banking on your resume. It's about the experience and what you're doing. Here at Navy Federal, or most banks, we can teach you banking. That's easy. But it's the life experiences, the tenacity, the resiliency that you bring is just tenfold and just priceless.
Agreed. As a hiring manager myself, I've had to hire a lot of people inside and outside the company, and it really is about the experience and are you connected to the mission? And you can teach anyone anything, just like you said. So I really hope that people are not intimidated to go out there and try new industries or try new careers as well.
No, it's so fun to see people's passion, and like you were saying earlier too, is it's not always about the money as well. They love, we want to make good money and we want to have awesome benefits. That's important. But the mission. And when you survey people and when you ask them about that, you'll get a lot of responses of no. They want to make sure that what they're doing is for the better and that they're helping people.
Yeah.
And it's rewarding.
Well, I think
the money comes with it.
Of course, and I think every industry on here probably has some of that in it. So I would encourage people to go check out the best careers for military spouses on Navy Federal's website. You mentioned Hire Heroes, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and other people getting involved. So lots of resources, and I'm glad that this is getting a lot of attention.
It is. It's been a really, really good thing to help. So.
Well, thanks again for coming on and taking the time to talk today. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Navy Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the National Credit Union Administration. This podcast is intended to provide general information and shouldn't be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. It's always a good idea to consult a tax or financial professional for specific information on how certain laws may apply to your individual financial situation. References to and participation with the military community does not constitute organizational endorsement. Navy Federal is an equal housing lender. Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission.